Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are continuing with the Ramayana. The Ramayana is one of two major epics in Indian mythology, the other one being the Mahabharata, which we have also covered in other episodes on this show. Today, we'll continue with Ram and Lakshman's search for Sita, starting with a little help from their new friends. But first, let me summarize the story so far. Ram was an avatar of Vishnu, the preserver in the Holy Trinity, together with Shiva the destroyer and Brahma the creator. Shameless plug, Brahma is also my dad. Ram was meant to become king of Ayodhya, but things didn't quite go his way. In some ruthless power play, one of his father's queens had him exiled for 14 years. But Ram did not go alone into exile. He had recently married, and his wife Sita decided to go with him. So did his brother, Lakshman. In one forest after another, Ram, Lakshman, and Sita tackled one danger after another. One of those was the demoness, Shurpanakha, followed by her brothers, Khar and Dushan. Ram and Lakshman managed to tackle them easily enough, but they weren't quite prepared for the sequel. Ravan, who was Shurpanakha, Khar and Dushan's brother, stepped in. Ravan was the ruler of Lanka and also the mega villain in the story. He took revenge, not by direct action, but by carrying off Sita. Ram and Lakshman searched all around, but all they found was a clue from their vulture neighbor, Jatayu. Jatayu told them about Sita's abduction before he passed away from injuries he sustained in his attempts to stop Ravan. The Ayodhya brothers next rescued a good guy from a demon's body, who returned the favor by directing them to Sugriv. Sugriv was a Vanar who could help them find Sita. Unfortunately, Sugriv was in a bit of a pickle himself. He had painted himself into a corner with his brother, Vali, who was arguably the most powerful creature in the universe at that time. The brothers met Sugriv and his loyal friends, including Hanuman. At Sugriv's insistence, they made a deal. Ram and Lakshman would help Sugriv with his Vali problem, in return for his help in finding Sita. We had left the last Ramayana episode on a cliffhanger, with Sugriv and Vali engaged in battle. Well, if you could call it that. It was, as usual, a totally one-sided contest, with Vali crushing Sugriv as usual. But this time, Ram, in his sniper position in a nearby tree, had just fired an arrow. That's precisely where we'll continue the story today. Ram's arrow, as the saying goes, never fails. Personally, I can totally attest to the accuracy of that statement. And I'm not just saying that as Vishnu's number one fan. Ram has taken into account all kinds of things, like air resistance, wind speed, structural integrity of the arrows, the height of the tree, the buckling of the tree branch on which Ram sat, a passing butterfly beating its wings near the calculated path of the arrow, the effect of the Earth's magnetic field, and 100 other such factors. Ram's arrow struck Vali squarely in the chest. The force of the impact sent Vali flying and eventually pinned him to the ground. "What was that?" asked Vali. "You haven't played fair, brother." Sugriv instantly replied, "It was their idea, not mine. I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted to be king again and get a little bit of revenge for what you did to me." When Lakshman glared at Sugriv, he hastily added, "And oh yes, I wanted to rescue my wife." "She's fine," Vali replied. "I don't suppose there's a way I can persuade you to lend me your ambulance team? I'm really hurting here." Sugriv glanced back at his medical staff, who were all looking shocked at the scene. They had lost count of the number of times they had to patch up Sugriv after a fight between the brothers. But today was so different. Finally, they had a marvelous new story they could tell their grandchildren years from now. Sugriv replied to Vali's question. "It was your own arrogance that led you to ignore the possibility that you might get hurt. But hey, I'm your king now. I can't appear to be heartless, especially not to my brother." He gestured to his emergency medical technicians, who then rushed to the scene with a stretcher. The chief doctor looked over Vali, mumbled for a long time, and finally said, "I spent 20 years at Warner Medical University and even longer at the Vriksharaj Memorial Hospital, and I can honestly say I never saw a more complicated case. What is causing Vali to be rooted to the spot? Is it paralysis?" Quick sidebar here. Vriksharaj was Vali's father and Sugriv's adoptive father. Another white-haired, bearded, and bespectacled doctor spoke up with a voice of experience. "It's psychosomatic. He believes he's been glued to the ground, and he doesn't have the willpower to overcome the inertia in his limbs." "You idiots," said Vali. "I'm shot. Don't you see this big arrow pinning me to the ground?" "He's delusional too," added another doctor. He held up some fingers and asked Vali, "How many fingers am I holding up?" Vali grimaced. "An arrow, a big pointy arrow stuck in my chest." "He's dodging the basic question," said a doctor. Vali ignored the doctors and addressed Ram directly. "You? Yes, I'm talking to you, mister. Who asked you to meddle in my affairs? This is between me and my brother. Why are you taking sides? And if you had to take sides at all, why not mine? Did you not hear about how I single-handedly defeated Ravan? I wiped the floor with him. If you wanted Sita back, you could have just asked me politely. I would have done it and made Ravan write you an apology and send your children gifts for the next 100 Diwalis." Lakshman looked at his brother with an "I told you so" expression. But Ram calmly answered Vali. "Aside from the fact that Diwali won't be invented until the end of this story, I can address your claim easily enough. Yes, I want Sita back more than anything. And yes, I can go to any lengths to get her back. And yes, I know you're quite capable of defeating Ravan. But one thing I will absolutely not do is tolerate wife abduction by anyone." "Funny you should mention that," said Vali. Did you know that Sugriv had abducted Ruma in the first place? And your buddy, Hanuman, helped him do that. Sure, I abducted Ruma from Sugriv, but because he had abducted her in the first place, I was really rescuing her, don't you think? No, Vali, and that's where you're making a big mistake, Ram said. Yes, of course I know about Sugriv and Hanuman carrying off Ruma, but that one was with her consent. It was called an abduction only by Ruma's father, who really didn't want Sugriv to be his son-in-law. When you carried off Ruma, you did so without her consent. Ravan did the same with Sita. Consent? Huh. I never thought of it before. But what if I want to abduct a lady and she says no? Then don't carry her off, Ram replied. Consent is everything. Here's an analogy. When you're about to carry someone off, it's like offering them a cup of tea. If they say no, you don't pour the tea down their throat, do you? Vali was dumbfounded. He had never really thought deeply about this before. It had seemed like a minor technicality in the beginning, but now it made sense. All he could do now was to hand over the palace keys to Sugriv and sign some papers transferring all his powers over to his brother. Vali did all that and then asked to be left alone with his thoughts in his final moments. Sugriv, Hanuman, Ram, Lakshman, and all the other Vanars walked away. All right, the first order of business is, began both Ram and Sugriv together. They both stopped, and Ram courteously asked Sugriv to continue. First order of business, Sugriv said, is to change all the currency. Not exactly what Ram and Lakshman had in mind. They had thought they could restart the search for Sita. But it made some sense. It was important to consolidate and assert authority, especially when there is a change in administration. So the Ayodhya brothers decided to wait. But then it took longer and longer for everything. After fixing the currency to show Sugriv's face instead of Vali's, Sugriv had to next change all the uniforms of the Vanar military and the Vanar police force. Then he had to redecorate the palace. He had to rename the roads, which also meant redoing the road signs. This took a while. Ram and Lakshman began growing a little impatient. Things got to boiling point one day when Lakshman, on Ram's behalf, asked to see Sugriv and was told by Sugriv's secretary that most certainly he could meet Sugriv. But he would first have to fill in a form and leave it with the front desk, and someone would get back to him in 2 to 3 business days. Lakshman was angry and disappointed and would have reacted a little violently had Hanuman not coincidentally arrived on the scene. After the usual pleasantries, Hanuman realized that his king, his buddy whom he had pledged to serve and protect, was not keeping his side of the bargain. Maybe he needed a reminder. Hanuman told Lakshman that Sugriv would come to meet the brothers tonight. The secretary, who had been listening to all this quietly, cleared his throat at this point and reminded them that Sugriv really had a packed calendar today. Hanuman glared at him, and the secretary quickly backed down. Hanuman went in for an audience with Sugriv. Sugriv, in the throne room, greeted him warmly. Hanuman, just the Vanar I wanted to see. Come, tell me, should we have red drapes here or green? Ruma tells me red will look great here, but Tara says green is better. And me, I'm leaning more towards blue. Sugriv, what are you doing? Hanuman asked. Decorating my throne room, of course. I didn't get a chance to do it last time, when I was king for a short spell. I just also heard that my application to join the King's Club has been accepted. So this time, I'm definitely going to their summer pool party. Stop this. This isn't you. I mean, just look at you, Hanuman said. And stop, he quickly added, as Sugriv began moving towards a mirror. I did not mean that literally. Think about the Sugriv in a cave and look at what being a king has done to you. Have you forgotten how you became king? What about your promise to Ram? After that, Sugriv was a little bit sheepish. Yes, he had gone a little too far, he admitted. But it was to be expected. Months of living in a tiny damp cave, and now suddenly, ruler of all Vanars? It would be rash to not let that go to your head. But he got the point now, and he would do all he could to try and locate Sita. The time was indeed now, and Hanuman would be in charge of operations. That perfectly suited Hanuman. To us, in the 21st century, he is most famous for being a servant of Ram. But Hanuman was so much more. He could lead. He quickly called up the cartographers, the military generals, and divided them into groups, assigning different sectors to each. Different groups of Vanars would be sent into each sector and seek any information they could find of Sita. Each group was armed with thousands of copies of wanted posters. Hanuman even had a sketch artist draw what an impression of Ravan probably looked like. Thankfully, some Vanars remembered what he had looked like when being beaten up by Vali. At headquarters, he also had Vanars monitoring a helpline 24/7. Hanuman himself would be part of the search. He would head south. He met the chief cartographer who handed him a map of the south. Hanuman unfurled the map and said with surprise, "This map is blank." "Oh, yes," the cartographer said. "Our entire department would thank you very much if you could fill it in as you go along." Hanuman shook his head and took off with his group. At the command center, meanwhile, Ram and Lakshman and even Sugriv personally sat as various messengers brought back reports. Every time a messenger returned, the map at HQ would be updated with a green yes, red no, or yellow maybe. A couple of days and several pitchers of coffee later, the map was looking depressingly red and very few yellows. The big unknown was the south. There had not been any news from Hanuman. So let's follow the action and see what Hanuman was up to. Hanuman, along with his companions, was pretty far from home. So far, they hadn't seen any evidence that might lead them to believe that Ravan had taken Sita south. True, There was a little bit of jewelry which was very likely made in Ayodhya, but it could have been anyone's earring which had accidentally dropped off a passing airplane. There was nothing to connect it definitely with Sita. Hanuman's companions were ready to give up and head home, but Hanuman had asked for 3 days. Give me 3 days and I'll give you new evidence, he had assured them. Well, that was 3 days ago, and they had decided to rest just a little bit before finally turning back. All of a sudden, something very large swooped down and landed on a tree nearby. It was a vulture. That by itself was not remarkable. What was remarkable was that the vulture politely tipped his hat and wished them good evening. You talk? Asked one of the Varners, surprised. That's a strange thought, coming from a monkey who can talk, said the vulture. Anyway, I'm Sampati. You probably don't know me, but maybe you know my brother, Jatayu? Jatayu? Why, yes. Well, that is to say, I didn't know him personally. I just heard about him. Hanuman chimed in. Why are you talking about my brother in the past tense? Asked Sampati. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. But your brother was trying to stop an abduction. He was murdered by Ravan. That was a shock to Sampati. He was silent for a long time, no doubt reminiscing about all the times he had had those friendly flying jousts with his brother. It's a shame, he said. I loved Jatayu. If I'd known what Ravan did to him, at least I could have tried to stop him somehow. Sorry, stop whom? From what? Asked Hanuman. You know, flying back to Lanka, and I'd have tried to intervene and rescue the woman he was carrying off. Now, in retrospect, it did seem like she was being carried off against her will. You saw Sita? Exclaimed Hanuman. Where? When? How? Which way did Ravan take her? This was just a few days ago, Sampati explained. Ravan was heading back to Lanka, his home. He had a good tailwind, so he must have made it in time, comfortably, in pleasant weather. I don't suppose you could guide us there, could you? Asked Hanuman. My wings no longer work except for the shortest flights. Narad explained how that happened when Jatayu was character of the week in episode 11, The Boy Who Lived. Anyway, I can direct you to the coast and point you in the general direction of Lanka, but I can't fly across the ocean myself. That was good enough for the Vanars. So Hanuman dispatched a messenger back to HQ to update Ram, Lakshman, and Sugriv. Meanwhile, with his remaining companions, he headed in the direction Sampati indicated. One thing I should mention here is that not all of Hanuman's companions were Vanars. One of them was a bear. This one was Jambuvan, character of the week from episode 2. He was to play a very important role in Hanuman rediscovering some of his powers. Yes, Hanuman had completely forgotten some of the amazing superpowers he had acquired in episode 25. And it was going to be up to Jambuvan to fix that. How exactly he did that will be explained in the next Ramayana episode. We'll close things here this week. Check the links in the show notes for previous Ramayana episodes. In the next episode, we'll do a folk tale again. This is another Punjabi folk tale. I know we just did one a few episodes ago, but one of you listeners specifically asked for this one. This one is about a bear who is not very good at negotiating, and a poor woodcutter who happens to get really lucky with his rich neighbor's pear tree. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.